Public discourse is fixated on kinetic threats, hypersonic missiles, carrier groups. This is a calculated diversion. The launch codes you should fear are not for warheads. They are for market solvency. The primary vector of 21st century warfare is not the explosion. It is the silence. A strategic adversary understands that a launch-on-warning posture is a kinetic liability. The real kill switch is the systemic shutdown of the information grid. This activates the blind Leviathan protocol. An adversary knows it cannot win a state-on-state kinetic conflict. The U.S. strikes in Venezuela, and capture of its leadership, confirmed by CBS News, was the mathematical proof of this supremacy. It guaranteed a conventional win. This very supremacy is the trigger. It forces the counter-move off the battlefield and into the civilian domain. Instead of attacking the Leviathan's teeth, it's military. The protocol is to attack its eyes and ears. The target vectors are therefore predictable. According to USI analysis, the critical nodes are the undersea cables carrying 99% of intercontinental data and the satellite constellations forming the nervous system of global finance. This is not war. It is strategic asset liquidation. The adversary's response was not a choice. It was a function of accounting. A kinetic state-on-state war against the United States is a terminal solvency crisis. The cost is not just measured in materiel, but in political capital. As analysts at Forbes have noted regarding Russia's military engagements, an unpopular foreign war is the fastest path to domestic liability and regime collapse. This weakness forces a pivot. When you cannot afford to engage on the battlefield, you are mathematically incentivized to bypass it. The objective shifts from destroying military assets to inflicting maximum systemic damage on the cheapest, softest vector of the opposing coalition. This is a launch-on-warning protocol, but for economics, not missiles. The U.S. kinetic victory in Venezuela, the capture of Maduro, CBS News, was the trigger. It guaranteed an asymmetric response. The target selection was not random, it was strategic. The attack on India's civilian internet backbone, ET-Edge Insights, was the pre-calculated, deniable countermove designed to punish a key coalition member at a near-zero kinetic cost. By targeting India, a U.S. ally confirmed by joint travel advisories, Travel and Tour World, the adversary turned a regional military win into the accelerant for a global crisis. The goal was to demonstrate that any coalition with the hegemon creates a fatal, civilian-facing liability. The message is simple. Your homes are now the front line. The core of the issue is a solvency crisis in kinetic warfare. The Royal United Services Institute, or RUSI, has modeled the fundamental economic imbalance. A $5 million main battle tank can now be neutralized by a $500 commercial drone. This is not a battlefield anomaly. It is a structural inversion of the cost of lethality. We are witnessing the terminal phase of what strategists call the democratization of violence. The state's monopoly on projecting high-impact force has evaporated. It has been decentralized, privatized, and put on the open market. When the kinetic cost to engage a hegemon is prohibitive, but the cost to cripple its civilian infrastructure is negligible, the choice is not a choice. It is a mathematical certainty. The adversary is financially incentivized to bypass the military vector entirely, treating the battlefield as a decoy for the real target, the unprotected civilian economic architecture. The home router crisis of 2026 in India was not an attack on India. It was a live fire test, staged from a global network of sanctioned dead zones. The location of an asymmetric strike is not a political choice. It is a mathematical calculation based on systemic fragility. To find the launch point, you do not look at military bases. You look for the gray zones. These gray zones are not accidents of history. They are engineered. While the media fixated on U.S. strikes in Venezuela, a far more significant protocol was activated. Data from 2026 confirms synchronized travel warnings issued by the entire coalition: the U.S., UK, Canada, Australia, and India. CSIS analysis identifies these coordinated warnings not as protective measures, but as the de facto designation of proxy laboratories. Operational vacuums perfect for deniable staging. The blueprint is clear. A conventional military win, such as the capture of Maduro, creates a kinetic cost that is unacceptable to the adversary. This triggers a launch-on warning protocol for a pre-planned systemic attack. Reports from RUSI confirm these gray zones provide the ideal cover for non-state proxies to refine and weaponize attacks against coalition weak points. The Indian front line was not in the Himalayas. It was in the living rooms of Mumbai, the unsecured vector chosen for its maximum economic leverage. This is the architecture of modern conflict. Regional instability in places like South Africa or even parts of Canada is not the cause. It is the symptom. It is the camouflage. Military supremacy has created a zero-sum game where the only logical countermove is to bypass the battlefield entirely. The next systemic crisis will not be telegraphed by troop deployments, but by the quiet, coordinated designation of the next gray zone. The core systemic risk is not the missile, it's the data. Nuclear deterrence rests on a doctrine known as launch on warning. According to analysts at CSIS, this policy is a cold calculation. If early warning systems detect an incoming decapitation strike, you launch your own arsenal before it can be destroyed on the ground. It guarantees retaliation, thereby ensuring stability. But this protocol was designed for a kinetic world of radar and satellites. When the vector of attack becomes digital, the doctrine becomes a catastrophic liability. A cyber attack that blinds the early warning network creates what military strategists call the fog of digital war. The commander is faced with a zero-sum choice. Is the blank screen a system's failure, or is it the electronic shadow of incoming warheads? The fear of strategic insolvency, of losing the entire deterrent, forces the launch. This is the mathematical certainty of the doctrine. When the data dies, the commander is forced to assume the worst. The keyboard, not the missile, becomes the first strike weapon. The 2026 Indian home router crisis was not the attack. It was the test fire, a low-cost, high-impact probe to measure coalition response time and attribution capability after the U.S. strikes in Venezuela. By weaponizing civilian infrastructure, the adversary confirmed a systemic vulnerability. The digital supply chain of a key ally is a softer, higher-value target than any kinetic asset. This successful test validated the blueprint of asymmetric escalation. The victory in Caracas triggered a launch-on warning protocol, not for missiles, but for economic warfare. As CSIS analysis confirms, the objective is to bypass the hardened U.S. mainland and fracture its global alliance structure by targeting the weakest logistical nodes. The initial calibration is complete. The next phase is not a question of if, but when. The target vector will escalate from pure data to data that controls matter. The objective, test the system's resilience to a cascading physical failure initiated by a deniable digital event. Within the next 10 months, anticipate a critical desynchronization event at a Tier 1 U.S. West Coast container port. Not a blackout, but a targeted corruption of crane and container routing software. Cranes will freeze mid-lift. Thousands of containers will be logged to incorrect locations. It will be publicly attributed to a botched server migration. The kinetic cost will be zero. The systemic cost, exacerbating the national affordability crisis, will be calculated in the tens of billions. It is the final calibration shot.